Tonight on Politicat, safety is on Americans' minds heading into the polls. We'll discuss gun control and police reform, two of the most crucial issues on the road to the midterms. It's your politics right now. Hello and welcome to Politicat. I'm Max Rothfeder. Tonight, we start with police reform. The killing of George Floyd, an unarmed black man, by police officer Derek Chauvin in 2020 reignited a long-standing movement for police reform and brought forward the conversation over systemic racism within American policing. Through Black Lives Matter and other activist organizations, there have been new calls to reform police policy and conduct across the United States. Moves to reduce the number of police shootings each year, especially of unarmed black men, and in some cases, calls to defund the police. In 2021, Congress created the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which takes actions including banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants for federal law enforcement, requires body cameras, and makes it easier to hold all police officers accountable in court. It would also create a nationwide misconduct registry to track repeated patterns with specific officers. It passed in the House, but has not yet been passed in the Senate. The results in this election could determine whether or not this law comes to pass. But for reforms in the police department in your city, it's the local elections this year that will primarily determine what kind of change you will see on a daily basis. These elections will determine who writes the rules for training and protocols for policing that your local departments must follow. The vast majority of Americans believe that there needs to be changes in police policy, but the extent is not unanimous. A Gallup poll in May 2022 found that 50% of Americans felt major reform was needed, 39% found minor changes were needed, while only 11% said no changes were needed. But the extent to which the change is needed is still contested. Generally, Democrats are in favor of large reforms and moves to defund police departments by placing that money elsewhere, while Republicans feel that some policy adjustments can be made, but reducing police funding will only increase crime. I'm now joined by Caitlin Bender-Thomas and Toby Cobby, who are here to discuss the issue. And Toby, I want to start with you. We know there are many issues on voters' minds this election. So how important is police reform to Illinois voters in comparison to some of the other issues?
Thank you, Max. Yeah, recent polling shows Illinois voters say public safety is one of the most important issues, and more than 1 in 5 say it is the most important issue in the upcoming midterms. This reflects a nationwide trend valuing crime as a top issue, and when most voters agree that crime and policing are top issues, they are split as to what they want to see in the next couple of years. Now, more Democrat and liberal voters, they would like to see more police reform, while Republicans would like to see more funding invested into policing. So police reform remains a heavy issue in this country and is still heavily controversial.
Yeah, so one Illinois law that intends to reform policing in the justice system is the Illinois Safety Act. So what is it and what are some of its implications?
Yeah, so the bill it introduces ambitious reform to the criminal justice system. It was introduced last year by the Illinois Black Caucus, and among the many policies introduced, the Safety Act will eliminate cash bail, ban purchase and use of some military-grade equipment, including grenade launchers, armored vehicles, and high-caliber weapons. It will also require that all officers use body cameras statewide by 2025, and it will prohibit chokeholds employed by police. Now, these are just some examples of a long list of sweeping changes, and it's done all in the name of pursuing more equitable and fair criminal justice systems while holding police accountable. And it'll go into effect on January 1st of 2023.
Yeah, so we can see that police reform will definitely be on voters' minds, and it will be so in the Illinois gubernatorial race. So how do Governor J.B. Pritzker and his opponent Darren Bailey compare in their views on police reform? Caitlin, I want to go to you.
Governor J.B. Pritzker and Republican Senator Darren Bailey have starkly different views on police reform. Last year, when Pritzker signed the Safety Act into law, he saw it as an effective way to reform the criminal justice system, ensure police officers are being held accountable, and rebuild trust in law enforcement. Republican Senator Darren Bailey said if he is elected, he would repeal the bill and reinstate cash bail. Now, Bailey's main focus is to combat the surging crime rates in Illinois, and he believes the elimination of cash bail will only make the issue worse. Pritzker, on the other hand, is more concerned with preventing police violence and misconduct, which has disproportionately affected people of color. I think it's also important to know that Bailey has been endorsed by police unions, and although he has not explicitly said he is against the police reform measures outlined in the bill, it is apparent through the two candidates' gubernatorial debates that he views crime as more of a pressing issue than police reform.
So you gave some good insights there, Caitlin, on what's happening here in Illinois, but of course it's an issue all across the United States. So how are some of the other states addressing this issue of police reform, and what is motivating and demotivating their approaches?
The police killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor spurred nationwide protests and pushed governors in nearly every state to put forward bills meant to change policing in the United States. Colorado was one of them, and Senate Bill 217 revokes personal certification for officers who have been found guilty of using inappropriate force. It also strips them of qualified immunity, which will allow civil rights claims against officers to be brought to court. Now, but in some Republican-controlled states like Ohio, lawmakers have not passed a comprehensive set of police reforms, although they have been proposed.
So yeah, Caitlin Bender-Thomas and Toby Tobby, thank you so much for following this story for us. Let's send it over to Lance Willem over at the desk, who has tonight's headlines. Lance?
Thanks, Max. Whether in Washington or on the campaign trail, it's been a busy political week. Let's get into it. The House January 6th committee voted unanimously Thursday to subpoena former President Donald Trump. While the subpoena holds the former president legally accountable for testifying, there is no guarantee that this move will hold any power beyond the midterms. A Republican majority in Congress could disband the investigative committee and withdraw the subpoena come January. President Biden announced yesterday that his student loan forgiveness plan has officially launched. The application is expected to provide debt forgiveness for up to 43 million borrowers. The program provides up to $10,000 in relief for individuals making less than $125,000 a year. To find more information on the new federal initiative, or to see if you are eligible, visit studentaid.gov. Controversy struck the Supreme Court Monday after justices refused to decide whether American Samoans should be granted full citizenship by birthright. American Samoans are the only people born on American soil who do not receive citizenship at birth. The American Samoan government encouraged the court not to take the case, citing continued division over American citizenship from its residents. Looking at Illinois, Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker and Republican Darren Bailey face off in their final gubernatorial debate tonight ahead of the November midterms. A joint Chicago Sun-Times and WBEZ poll from earlier this week found that Governor Pritzker leads by 15 points. He'll try to stay the course this evening as Darren Bailey tries to make up some ground. The debate began at 7 p.m. on WGN and News Nation and is being streamed live online. Those are some of the stories we've been watching this week. Let's send it back to Max with our next panel. Max?
Thanks for keeping an eye on everything for us, Lance. Now let's turn to the state of gun control in the United States. There have been 545 mass shootings in the United States just this year. This includes two of the most recent shootings, a mass shooting in Raleigh, North Carolina late last week, and a shooting near James Madison University over the weekend. Last week, a federal judge ruled that a ban on owning guns with removed serial numbers violates the Constitution. The judge cited a recent Supreme Court case that said it was unconstitutional to limit concealed carry handgun licenses. In addition to these recent legal rulings, the American public has voiced its own concerns. According to a Gallup poll, as of June 2022, 66% of Americans believe in strengthening laws regulating firearm sales. As the midterms approach, the future of gun control in the United States rests in voters' hands. Tonight, we have Politicat's Simone Garber and Lena Peterson to discuss how the issue will factor into the upcoming election. Welcome. So I want to start with you, Simone. How have mass shootings affected politicians' stances on gun control legislation?
Yeah, thanks, Max. So as new details have emerged regarding last week's Raleigh, North Carolina shooting, which left 5 dead and a 15-year-old suspect in critical condition, many are enraged by the frequency with which these tragic events keep occurring. Political leaders are responding in similar ways, with President Biden calling for a ban on semi-automatic weapons, saying that we, quote, must do more to get guns out of dangerous hands. Now, the ban in question, according to Raleigh publication The News and Observer, would make it illegal to import, sell, make, transfer, or own a semi-automatic assault weapon. I think it's important to note that North Carolina, a traditionally red state, is currently represented by Democratic Governor Roy Cooper. In the aftermath of the shooting, Cooper echoed Biden's call for expedited gun control legislation, expressing his condolences for the families of the victims and validating a grief-stricken community in the process.
And so, Simone, we mentioned the West Virginia ruling in the open. So how do the recent developments in the judiciary around gun control impact these upcoming midterms?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Max, West Virginia Judge Joseph Goodwin recently blocked the ratification of a federal amendment that would have strengthened gun control matters in a action met positively, actually, by avid supporters of the Second Amendment. So Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, who is a staunch Republican, in 2021 was quoted as saying that he would enact no gun control safety measures if elected governor. And he has yet to issue an official statement on a shooting that occurred this weekend near James Madison University that left 8 injured. In May, following the Robb Elementary School shooting in Uvalde, Texas, Youngkin offered his thoughts and prayers to those affected by the shooting, but did not address the prevalence of gun violence as a national phenomenon. So it's unlikely that any sort of reform legislation will pass in states like Virginia, as many of their constituents view the right to bear arms as fundamental despite recent shootings. This stagnancy contrasts a recent proposal led by Democrats in New Jersey, which is actually set to enact a law that restricts when and where guns can be carried outside the home.
So, Lena, I want to turn next to you. So what are some of the politicians in the closest races this upcoming election saying about gun control?
Yeah, thanks, Max. So one race to watch right now is the Georgia Senate race between incumbent Raphael Warnock and his Republican challenger Herschel Walker, which is an extremely tight race for Warnock to defend his seat in the Senate. While Warnock has defended his votes on gun violence prevention during his 2 years in the Senate, Walker has repeatedly attempted to portray Warnock as an incumbent who has voted with Biden too often. Another race to watch right now is the Michigan governor's race between Governor Gretchen Whitmer, incumbent, and Republican challenger Tudor Dixon. In their most recent debate, Dixon and Whitmer argued over the best way to address school and gun violence, with Whitmer vocally supporting background checks and red flag laws. Meanwhile, Dixon has favored more guns, less governmental oversight, and the elimination of gun-free zones. So as the midterm election draws near, these are two tight races that will undoubtedly be impacted by how voters view gun control legislation in the swing states of both Georgia and Michigan.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the key races, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the electorate. So Gen Z is extremely vocal about this issue of gun legislation. So Lena, last question to you. What are they looking for from candidates that they might vote for?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Max, there is widespread opposition to guns on campus among students who are looking for gun sense candidates. In a poll according to Newsweek, 70% of college students favor banning assault-style weapons. And in the 2020 election, studies found that gun violence and mass shootings was a top issue for Gen Z voters. Recent shootings on college campuses, such as the one you mentioned at James Madison University on Sunday, when paired with trauma associated with school shootings, undoubtedly has shaped the way that Gen Z will show up to the polls in November to support gun sense candidates and gun control legislation. Many young voters who are dedicated to creating a future free from gun violence are looking for candidates who will support gun laws and will implement comprehensive change within their communities.
Well, Lena, Simone, thank you so much. We know that you'll continue to follow these issues for us. And if you live in any of these states, early voting begins this week. As we discuss the issues, just remember that some have already begun to cast their ballots. This election day is the last day to vote, but many will make up their minds and go to the polls in the hours and days to come. And also remember that you can tune in to our special NNN midterm election show on Tuesday, November 8th at 6 p.m. Central. For all of us here at Politicat, I'm Max Rothfeder. Have a good night.